Okay, everyone. Again, I apologize for the delay. We are ready to begin the webinar. Today's webinar is titled Operational Excellence, a Home Run with ENFOS. And I'll be your host this afternoon, Michael Douglas. I'm the Director of Accounts here at ENFOS. Now, for those of you on the call not familiar with us, we're a commercial software company based in the San Francisco Bay Area. With offices in Chicago and Beijing. Chicago is the office where we're broadcasting out of today. Our customers include the multinationals shown on the screen, ranging in size and industry type. So for today's program, we're going to be covering the following topics, presenting a specific case study from one of our customers, the Racer Trust. Now, since everyone on the call is muted, you could submit questions through the Questions tab of your dashboard. We're going to try to answer those live, and whatever we don't get to today, we will send out a follow-up email. Also, today's webinar will be recorded and made available to all attendees in the next couple of days. Dave, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. So with that, I'd like to introduce one of our panelists today, Dave Favero from the Racer Trust.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I guess just to let everybody know, my position is Deputy Cleanup Manager for the state of Michigan. We'll get into other details about Racer in a while, but Racer's been in existence since March of 2011. I've been as a Deputy Cleanup Manager since that time, and have a lot of prior project management experience and regulatory experience that I bring to the job and to our application here at Racer at ENFOS.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Now we also have on the call today Roger Well. Roger is the Chief Operating Officer here at ENFOS. He was heavily involved in Racer Trust evaluation and ultimately the implementation of ENFOS. Roger?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate your attendance on the call. We look forward to talking to you about what we think is a very high priority issue and topic for everyone in the remediation business, and that is how to get the biggest bang for your buck on cleaning sites up, moving them through the life cycle, and staying within budgets and within work commitments. Just a little bit about myself. I spent the first half of my career as an environmental consultant doing actual remediation work as a hydrogeologist and then project manager. The second half of my career has been on the software side, being part of the management founding team of ENFOS. We set out to design and build a commercial software solution to help optimize the remediation management business processes. We felt there was a need in the industry for that, and that's what we set out to do back in 2000. Since then, we've had the opportunity to work with
Dave, we'd like to start if you could give us kind of a bit of a background of the Racer Trust.
Sure. As I said before, Trust was established in March of 2011 through the GM bankruptcy process. GM filed for bankruptcy in June of 2009, and there was significant effort by dozens of folks, regulators, consultants, attorneys, and so forth to get to get the old GM, which was called Motors Liquidation Company during the bankruptcy period, to get a settlement agreement out of that and get the new company operating and the old assets or the old and environmental liabilities assigned to a trust so that things could move forward on cleanup and for redevelopment. And as this says, there was about $770 million that was established for property cleanups and management as a part of the trust fund. So next slide, please. The overall mission is kind of a unique thing, and the priority that RACER puts on the mission here is to try to help out and the economic development in locations where the former GM operated and shut down, and that goes to the properties in the 14 different states that we own. So it's an intense effort to work with communities and try to attract business. And part of that's a kind of balancing act, though, to not promise too much, in that there's probably never going to be the type of jobs that GM brought to the locations that we have, but we're at least want to improve things and help the communities out. And the part that I deal with is more the environmental cleanup side, which is important, but it's really there so we can get out of the way of redevelopment and or work with the redeveloper to allow the property to be productive again. And again, that identified several specific items there, but we can go to the next slide. There were the numbers that get tossed out are 89 properties that we received through the bankruptcy process. You can divide those up different ways to come up to different numbers, but basically 89 properties, and about 60 of those have environmental budgets that go with those. Each site was established a specific budget through working with regulators and saying this is what, based on what we know and understand and can predict, here's what we think it's going to take to get that site to a no further action or closure to non-residential standards. And so those budgets were set up for 60 different sites. 36 of those were in Michigan, and myself and the cleanup manager in Michigan, Grant Trigger, are responsible for trying to get those sites to closure within the provided budgets. And let's see, is there anything I left out here? I think that's fine. Next slide, please.
Hey Dave, quick question.
Yep.
How many cleanup managers does RACER have?
RACER has 4 cleanup managers, and I'm a deputy in Michigan, so there's 5 of us in total. 1 deputy manager is devoted to the state of New York with our largest budgeted cleanup site, 120 million or something like that, and then 1 other site in New York. And then there is a cleanup manager for Indiana and Kansas, Missouri, New Jersey, a couple other states, and then there's another cleanup manager for Ohio, Delaware, Louisiana, Pennsylvania. So there are 4 cleanup managers and then a deputy in Michigan, because basically there are 36 projects here that we deal with.
Got it. Do you know approximately how many contractors, environmental consultants, and laboratories RACER works with on all their projects?
Well, just offhand, I would say probably 15 to 20 different consultants, and a half dozen to 10 labs probably support the environmental side.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. This was just one of the largest budgeted project in Michigan. This is Full Run Factory in Ypsilanti, where I'm sitting right now, and an interesting place with a lot of history. And but again, from the new GM perspective, not something they wanted to take with them out of and include in the new company, but it's an example of what we have to deal with, a 5 million square foot building. We're right next to an airport. Again, a lot of history, a big budget with an elm apple problem here, major elm apple problem, and we're continuing to work through the remediation with in cooperation with the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. And on the redevelopment side, there's a lot of effort engaging the local officials and working through that and with redevelopers. And there was several discussions and meetings and work sessions, and the decision has been that this plant should be demolished to make it more attractive for future redevelopment. It's just the age and condition and the size of the building just do not lend itself to redevelopment here. So that's this is one of the few remaining sites where we actually have buildings left.
Now, is there any indication if the demolition of a factory that size, could that open up additional, problems or opportunities for cleanup?
Well, in this particular case, the building itself, no, and under the circumstances here to not create a bigger groundwater problem, the DEQ is in support of the slab remaining underneath the building. So from a cleanup standpoint, it's not going to have a major impact, except that again here the groundwater conditions are kind of interrelated with stormwater management, so it becomes a stormwater management issue in addition to the cleanup when the building comes down.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that was a great overview of RACER. We appreciate that, Dave. And we're going to switch gears for a minute, and Roger Well is going to come back and kind of help us explore this concept of operational excellence and why operational excellence for remediation.
Okay, thanks, Mike. The first slide talked or gives you 3 different definitions of operational excellence. I don't want to read those to you since you have the information. What's interesting is that the middle definition actually comes from Chevron Environmental Management Corporation, which is their environmental group. So they come up with their own operational excellence definition around their environmental stewardship. So I added that one to the list. The last definition really strikes home for me, and this comes from the journal Fast Company, and they did an article about a year ago called The Anatomy of Operational Excellence. And when I think about remediation and asset decommissioning and the environmental aspects associated with that, this definition really strikes me because it focuses on management capability. And that's what software is really trying to do. It's trying to expedite management capability. And not just from a transactional management standpoint, but from a people and a knowledge standpoint as well. So I think when you talk about operational excellence, you can certainly talk about management systems, but you also have to have a strong people component in there as well, and that ties into the capability. Next slide.
Roger,
sure.
A question. Why do you think this concept of operational excellence is becoming such an important idea for companies these days?
Well, it probably always has been, and it probably always will be. The first response would be that remediation is it's a cost center for organizations. So, as an example, with RACER, Dave talked about they have a fixed budget, and that's unique in the industry for the most part because they don't have a revenue-generating business other than the sales of property. But they don't have a revenue-generating business that they can go back and take reserve adjustments for. So their the nature of their business is there's X amount of money, and we know, we have these properties identified and these liabilities identified, and we have to go out and execute to perfection on those because there is no additional funding source, and the properties need to be redeveloped and ultimately sold so that they can become assets for the communities that they're in. So for Racer, it's like a no-brainer. They have to do it, and that was really why Racer looked for a solution like ENFOS and then implemented it. For other companies, it's around the economics and the business conditions. And so as the economy either goes up or goes down, based on the different industrial sectors, companies are getting cost pressure to perform. So some organizations have fixed budgets, and they want to do the work, the remediation work, or the environmental work at or below that budget and not go back for budget increases. The difficult aspect, and this leads into kind of why environmental liability fits well with operational excellence, is that there's just a high level of uncertainty when it comes to remediation. And that goes into the next slide, if you want to turn to that. When we talk about environmental liability management programs or remediation programs determined, based on what your nomenclature is, the way I always describe it is that it's a complex service. It's not like a typical capital project. It's not like a typical operating expense project. It's very unique and has attributes that make it complex and make it very difficult to forecast and make it very difficult to manage. So all of us that are probably on this phone have some level of responsibility when it comes to managing remediation sites. We might be consultants that are part of the supply chain. We might be project managers for the companies we work for. We've got some role in it. But you can see on this slide, we just try to pick out some of the most difficult factors. You have all these external issues that are driving the businesses, the environmental regulations, the financial regulations if you're a publicly traded company, the community and the property owners, not only of the property that's been contaminated, but also the surrounding properties, and then you have the economy and the economic conditions. Then corporations are set up to deal with these issues, and people that I work with within the EHS or the remediation function are constantly dealing with all these other business functions, whether it's IT or finance or real estate, legal, procurement, communications. These are some of the examples. So this right here already sets up a situation that can become quite complex or can get out of control if not managed properly. Then when you look at what remediation is actually doing, it's made up of many disciplines, many highly specialized disciplines, right? We have geologists, we have chemists, we have engineers, we have accountants, we have project managers. The list goes on and on and on. So there are many, many disciplines that play some part or role in it, which means it's a people business, right? And people generate transactions, not just financial transactions, but data transactions. And there are thousands of transactions and information flowing all over the place. There is a complex regulatory environment. We did a study last year, and one of the driving factors that most industrial executives were telling us would be the changing landscape of the environmental regulations, such as reopeners, sites that get reopened that they thought were closed, corrective action plans that were approved that now the regulators want to come back in and make changes to. So it was created an unstable situation. Outsourced business model, right? So this business is made up of environmental consultants, contractors, and laboratories that are actually doing the work. So managing the procurement, managing the work scope, the deliverables, the costs and expenditures associated with that are complex. And then, most organizations have many different systems where they're trying to manage and keep track of all this information.
Yeah. So, Roger, in regards to this kind of complex structure, there's obviously, you mentioned there's implications to loose management, but to take that a step further, there's probably some specific financial implications to loose management structure. Some that come to mind for me would be maybe disclosures or cash flow budgeting or Sarbanes-Oxley controls. Are there others?
Those, I think, are certainly the main ones, keeping track of what you know about.
Mm-hmm.
But because in reserve or provision management, there's a high level of uncertainty, particularly out in the future years, the challenge is to have a policy that makes sense in terms of the reserve and provision management, but then also to be able to execute that so that there's an understanding up and down the organization that when the vice president of remediation or the remediation director goes to the CFO and says, we need more money or we need to replenish what we just spent, there's an understanding of why that's the case, not just that we exceeded our budget. So in a nutshell, again, why is operational excellence important for remediation? We've attempted to summarize that on this slide, and I've already talked about the complex service piece. I talked about the outsource model already, the diverse supply chain, many handoffs. So from any project management environment, when there are a lot of handoffs, there are risks. There's risk of poor communication, information loss. Anything really can happen when you have to make handoffs, and that's true of any project team. The broader or the bigger the project team gets, the more risk there is for there to be errors. Uncertainty. This is the third one, the bottom of the remediation challenge summary diagram. And I think that as environmental professionals, we all know these very well, right? The uncertainty has to do with geological issues, chemical issues, remedial technology, regulators, future land use, and then time. And then lastly, it's a massive data stream. And I've talked about that already. You have financial data, you have environmental data, compliance data, and you have a tremendous amount of transaction volume and documents. And if not managed properly, this will lead to higher costs. It'll lead to perpetual liabilities and also surprises. And these are the things that executives and project teams are trying to reduce or eliminate.
Now, looking at this slide, Roger, it's obvious, and everyone on the phone knows this, that this particular business is very data-driven. Do you think it's a missed opportunity for companies not to manage this in a more strategic way?
I think if you asked me that 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't even understand the question. But because technology has continued to improve over the years, not only on back-end systems such as SAP or Oracle or PeopleSoft, systems like that, but also the front-end technologies that take the day-to-day tasks and activities and attempt to automate them, put them all in one location. I would say that the answer to your question, yeah, it would be a missed opportunity if this isn't on your strategic roadmap to try to really streamline the processes and the data management and the reporting in a platform that would allow you to achieve operational excellence or do the best that you can do with what you have.
I think that's a great segue into kind of discussing a little bit more, exactly what Racer's approach has been to achieve operational excellence.
Okay. Yeah, it was a particular challenge when Racer was first created and had to basically start a accounting system and process from scratch to get going. So as Roger said earlier, one of the first things that our chief financial officer did is to try to identify something to help us out, basically, and get us organized and start us on the way of properly managing our environmental admin, kind of day-to-day costs and budgets and POs and so forth. So in our context, we had to work it from a couple different directions. As the slide says here, we had site-specific environmental budgets. So that is, each site has its budget. That's what it has. That's where we get the budget. That's all we have for that site. There are some ifs, ands, and buts, but basically the way we operate, that's all we have for the site. That's what we've got to do. Racer, the part of the bankruptcy funding, though, also went to this other function that we call admin that helps to pay salaries, administrate the trust, and deal with the redevelopment issues and property sales and so forth. So Racer had, and those two funding buckets could not intermix ever per our settlement agreement. So Racer had to come out and establish and find something that would be able to deal with that initial complication, as well as the site-specific environmental ones, and some of that's discussed a little bit later on here. So maybe we could go on to the next slide.
Dave, if we could, I'd like to expand just real quick on this idea, the one opportunity to get it right, because I think that's unique to Racer. And as Roger talked about earlier, you know, if you blow through the entire trust, there's not an additional revenue source aside from, you know, the selling of properties to get additional money, whereas in a lot of companies, you know, they can just take reserve adjustments. I guess my question is, what, in your experience, having done this for quite some time, you know, long before Racer, what do you see as some of the differences between, you know, that model versus kind of the one opportunity to get it right?
Well, I think it has created a need, and one of the settlement requirements was that from on a site-specific basis each year we get an approval of our budget, projected budget for that year from the lead regulatory agencies. So I think that one opportunity to get it right and limited funds has forced us to I guess open up and be more interactive and try to involve the regulators more into the process. And as many of the regulators have said, is that, you know, they're not used to looking at budgets. They're a little leery of approving things and looking at those, but they've had to do that. And we try to make them understand that when they start requiring certain things, do they really need that, given our budget here and what we're trying to accomplish and do. And it's really forced us to take to be more involved and involve the regulators more. And certainly, you know, the management aspects become key, because we're on the short term, we're looking at these budgets that have to be approved by the regulators, which we can't exceed in any given year. So we're managing to those, and then we're managing to a longer term ultimate budget that is out there established in for a particular site. So it's just it brings the budget a lot more into decision making and considerations, and how the budget can best be used to address the risk that a given site may pose.
Yeah, Roger, my question for you is, what about, you know, Racer had to do this because of how they were formed as an organization, but what about companies that have been managing a legacy portfolio and have been doing so for, you know, 20 or 30 years? Is it too late?
Well, that, you know, if you were to ask some people, remediation was supposed to be done by now. And, you know, some portfolios, you know, depending on the type of facility or the type of chemical of concern, there have been very optimistic projections of getting sites cleaned up and getting no further actions or closures. one of the reasons that hasn't happened is because of the ever-changing regulatory environments and regulatory frameworks, and even changes in laboratory equipment and ability to detect concentrations now down to the parts per trillion, or some very, very small detection limit that even wasn't available before. And then just the long tails that remediation projects have for long-term monitoring and maintenance, I think have surprised some people somewhat. So to answer the question, it's never too late. Many portfolios that are managed by companies are either mid-maturity or late maturity, but they're going to go on for a long time. And a lot of those activities in the tail end are very repetitive, routine tasks that, if done in a very highly structured way, you can still wring out some efficiencies and some cost savings.
Good point. Well, that's a great kind of segue into Roger is going to spend a little bit of time talking about what exactly the Racer Trust was looking for when they started to evaluate potential software solutions.
Sure. Yeah, we were contacted by the team members of the Racer administrative team, and particularly the CFO, and that was because we had a commercial application that was designed specifically for the remediation function. But even before they talked to us, the Racer team had developed these criteria, of which I think most companies strive to achieve. But they want accurate, reliable, consistent, and timely information, maximizing workflow efficiencies, and that's what you're really trying to do there is you're trying to automate activities or tasks that are lower level in nature, so that your staff and your smart people can focus on the strategies and the decision making, as opposed to pushing paper or managing data as a big part of their job. So that was a big one. Racer needed strategic planning and budgeting tools so that they could allocate these fixed budgets appropriately, on a timeline, and also by work stages or phases of work, and then manage their purchase commitments to the suppliers who are actually out there doing the work. Centralized document management was important to them. Integrating with their general ledger system and their accounts payable system was important, so that, again, the systems could talk to each other, and it wouldn't be necessary to have people manually entering and doing redundant data entry. They needed an internal control environment so that delegations of authority could be managed properly, approval limits, and then backup justification documentation. And then they were also looking to try to come in under their budgets. So they wanted to be able to plan and execute their work, and hopefully have cost savings on the back end. So the little bit of the timeline on that then, ENFOS was selected by Racer in August of 2011. A rapid implementation was put in place. So I believe this was the fastest implementation that we ever did. So it was done in 60 days, which is a very short time. So from the time the decision was made to the time that users could use the system, start managing projects within ENFOS, it was a 60-day period of time. And then they went live November of 2011. They currently have a little over 230 users on the system, so that includes the cleanup managers that Dave talked about, as well as some other internal staff. But it's a very lean staff that Racer has, and they rely heavily on their environmental consultants. So many of the users are environmental consultants and contractors and labs as well. ENFOS is integrated with their system, which is SAGE or MAS. And then one other unique feature, because Racer's work needs to be very transparent and also visible to the communities, Racer has a public website, and there are certain documents that are part of the project management work that are loaded into their ENFOS system can be tagged as a publicly shareable document, and then that automatically places that document on the external website so that someone in the community or an adjacent property owner or a prospective buyer can go in and get the updated information off of Racer's public website. So that was another value-added feature that was developed.
Now, one thing I know that was unique in Racer's evaluation is that a lot of it was driven by their CFO, whereas typically it's a vice president of EH&S or director of remediation that we work with that ultimately hires us. Can you comment on that, Roger? I guess maybe the advantages of having someone with that finance focus driving an evaluation?
Well, sure, and I think that the factor behind that really had to do with the fact that the trustee, Elliott Laws, and also the financial management team at Racer, they were tasked with getting a system in place, getting the program set up, getting the cleanup managers and the environmental suppliers trained very quickly, and it really was about managing both that administrative budget and the strategic cleanup budget that Dave mentioned. So it was, in this case, in this example, it made sense that it was really coming from the finance side of the business, because the cleanup managers were really starting to focus on transitioning the projects and making sure that work is being done and there were no compliance gaps and things like that. And the finance group and CFO, Scott Hamilton, really took that effort as the lead.
Yeah, I think Scott definitely was in the lead, was looking for input from the cleanup managers and the redevelopment side of things in terms of making the selection to make sure that, one of his primary concerns was the integration with the accounting system, but the rest of us who wanted to use it wanted to make sure it was usable. So he was relying on us from that perspective to make sure that folks were comfortable using ENFOS on a daily basis.
Okay. Dave, so could you comment now on like the core processes and controls that are that Racer manages using the ENFOS system?
Sure. As the slide talks about here, we have our budgets established. And the ENFOS allows us to insert into it and in her budgets that extend out, in some cases for 100 years in the extreme, some cases only 2 or 3 years depending on the site. But it allows us to put that in and keep that and change that and update as appropriate based on how the budget and the work progresses during any particular year. We tend not to look at it too often, except on a yearly basis, or if there's a need for a budget amendment that we need approval from a regulatory agency during a particular year. So we look at those key points in time. And again, it keeps the site-specific environmental budgets, all that's separate as our settlement agreement requires from the administrative budgets. So it's essentially two companies almost within ENFOS that we operate under, because those funds can't mix per our directive in the settlement agreement. And you'd mentioned that there is some money coming into the trust for sale of property, and that is true, but again, per the settlement agreement, that money goes into the administrative fund and not towards any particular environmental cleanup at any particular site.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And again, it helps to manage proposals, change orders, and the various authorities and that are delegated and authorized within ENFOS. And again, I know from the accounting standpoint that makes things very helpful when the books are audited. And that, again, was one of Scott's primary concerns in looking for a system and selecting ENFOS. It provided a lot of controls that help when it comes time to be audited. From a competitive bidding process, that kind of varies depending on the activity and whether it's an administrative budget, environmental budget. But generally, we would handle the actual bidding process outside of ENFOS, but as that vendor is selected, then we try to integrate them and have them use ENFOS. In some cases, if there's not going to be a lot of interaction with it, our accounting folks just do the entering of proposals and invoices and so forth and take care of that, as opposed to trying to get a vendor up to speed that may only be working on one project for a short time, so as to be efficient there. And again, the next point is the key from the environmental standpoint, in that ENFOS is our last line of defense after the human review of the numbers, to make sure that on the environmental side we do not authorize any purchase orders in total for a given project that exceed the budget that's established for that purchase order or that project for that year and approved by an agency. And it allows us to manage down to the task level, which is what, again, we're required to do as we get our annual budget approvals from the state at a task level. So at any given task, it tells us if we're trying to authorize a PO above a certain amount, and if that's the case, we've got to go back and adjust things. You know, the idea is obviously the human factor would come in, and that shouldn't happen. But again, on some projects where there's multiple vendors, things get more complicated than others, and ENFOS has proven effective several occasions there. And again, the same goes for the invoice validation against the purchase order. It's by task, as they are approved within ENFOS for that given purchase order. So it's the final electronic check, if you will, of after the human checks are done, and then allows us to get it processed properly and the appropriate sign-offs based on the delegation of authority within RACER. Other items mentioned on here, obviously it's great to have when questions come up on a given PO for a consultant to be able to go right to ENFOS and look at there, see what invoices have been processed or the status of those and what the task remaining budgets are and so forth. So that's certainly just a major plus from the ENFOS side, and helps us on those occasions where we need to review those items. Having it right there is great, and not having to deal with an accounting system to get that information and feedback. That's a huge time saver. The other items on here, again, reinforces some of the audit type checks, the financial improvement limit checks, and the next approver and so forth help, again, verify and show the processes to the auditors to help the accounting folks to pass the audit, basically, and point to places where we need to improve our reviews or add additional checks to make sure that the work, that the cost and so forth are being charged properly and reviewed properly and so forth. Contract terms verification, some of that we kind of vary on how much we use that, frankly. It kind of depends the way that most of our contracts and the quantities rates and the purchase orders are set up. We don't necessarily rely on ENFOS to verify rates because a lot of the work's done by, as I said, maybe 15 or 20 consultants. We don't necessarily rely on ENFOS for those. We rely on the human and have those rates to check. And that is something I know that Scott wants us to try to implement more, but given priorities at this point, it hasn't happened yet. So,
Dave, I'm curious, with having this level of access to information, but not only information but control of your process, how has that benefited you specifically, your job?
Well, I think in terms of managing projects, it's and probably the bullet that I skipped over there about the automated workflow. That's really where it's added a lot of efficiency to my job. The invoices, the budgets, everything is available when you want to look at it, when you need to see it, and it manages and helps to keep everything organized. And as we relate to our accounting folks and processing and dealing with particular questions or issues, it just has been very efficient for both ourselves, the project managers, and the accounting folks. It takes a lot of time and effort out of tracking down concerns or problems or questions on invoices, and just as it allows a project manager to deal with, but most projects managers want to deal with more as the technical side rather than the budget side, so it allows the budgeting and the accounting side to run much smoother.
Okay, thank you.
All right, folks, the last slide that we have is really just a summation of what Dave went through on the core processes and controls. So the diagram here, really what it's showing is that their processes are integrated, and they do that all within one system. And then on the back end, their info system that helps them manage these processes just communicates with the accounting data. So their planning and budgeting is linked into their vendor proposals and their purchase orders, and then they've got that last and final automated check to make sure that their work commitments don't exceed their budgets or in their life cycle plans. And then once a contractor or consultant has their purchase order or work order, they'll start to do work and do their progress billing, and they've got automated project management checks and controls in there as well, so that the system is basically not allowing a purchase order or a change order to be exceeded unless somebody needs to make a change. And in that case, the change management process would either be a change order on a purchase order, or it could be a budget change. So that's really the picture of that detail. And then Dave also talked about some task level details, and that's really what a front-end system like ENFOS can provide. Is it really bridges the gap between the accounting data and the project management data. Because the project managers, we talk about things like a phase of work or a task or an activity, and the accounting side of it talks about it talks about general ledger account numbers or cost center numbers or expense categories. So the front end to the accounting system should be tailored to how project teams and project managers do their work, but it should be able to seamlessly roll that information up and hand it off on the back end so that just the general ledger can be updated and bills can get paid, and the profit and loss statement can be constructed. So that really summarizes that with one picture.
So Roger, one of the things that, if I'm sitting on this call and, working for a company, even if I'm not using ENFOS, I'm doing all of these things currently. I have a process for planning and budgeting and vendor proposals and work orders and invoices, but I think the difference here is that Racer is integrating all of these processes, and they're all being managed in a standardized way in the same system. And that's really, I think, where the value is.
It is. So when you talk about it from an operational excellence standpoint, that is the how as opposed to the why. You know, we spent the first part of the webinar talking about the why, and then in this last part that Dave talked about and this diagram is the how. And that is that you really need to integrate and link all those different processes into the same master process because they're all interrelated. And the project teams need their project controls and their financial reports in real time because the conditions at the sites are changing so rapidly. They need to know where they're at any point in time to deal with the uncertainty that we talked about earlier.
Okay, thank you. So I want to end on time. I've got one more thing to offer all of our participants to the webinar today. And then if you can stay on, we may run a couple minutes over. We do have some questions that have come in that I'd like to answer. If you have any questions about today's webinar, any of the content, you know, as I mentioned, the recording is going to be sent out to everybody, but if you'd like the actual PowerPoint, feel free to contact Lacey Orr. Her email and phone number is on the screen, lacey@enfos.com, and she can forward you the PowerPoint. But what we wanted to offer everybody who is participating on the webinar today, for the past 3 years, and this will be our 4th year, we've hosted an annual solutions conference. It's a mix of all of our existing customers, suppliers to our customers, and anybody that's interested in evaluating ENFOS. It's a 2-day event in San Francisco. The theme this year is the art of operational excellence. And I've got the link to register at the bottom of the page here. But if you register by Tuesday, July 30th, and you enter the code webinar100, you'll receive an additional $150 off the registration fee. And the registration fee just covers your admission to the conference as well as your meals over the course of the 2 days. There's hotel information on there as well. So, you know, if anybody has any questions about that event, feel free to contact Lacey as well. So, Dave, if you've got a couple more minutes here, we did have a couple questions come in that I wanted to go back to. The first one was, how was the original cost estimate arrived at?
It was a very involved process that started with a environmental consultant supporting the bankruptcy, looking at available information for the site, and based on that coming up with estimated cost, again, to get that site to a regulatory closure. From that point, it was shared with the lead regulatory agencies, and it was reviewed and back and forth and basically negotiated to get to an agreeable amount. And the Department of Treasury had an environmental consultant that tried to provide some site-specific and also kind of portfolio-wide consistency to the cost estimating process. But it was very thorough and comprehensive, and I want to say long, but really in the scheme of things, it was over probably less than a year or so. But it was a very comprehensive and thorough process.
So when you have a scope change that may impact the budget, what steps do you typically take?
If there's a scope change that impacts what I call a regulatory approved annual budget, then we would make note of that and prepare what we call an amendment request to go to the state to get that budget approved to implement that scope. If the question's meant more in regard to if there's a scope change different than what went into the assumptions that generated the cost or the budget for that site overall, that's kind of a different matter. But generally, the idea is, and the way we approach it is that if we have a scope change in one of our particular tasks or a new task comes up as additional scope, we need to look to those other tasks to find ways to do things less expensive. If there's a more efficient way to do things, or if certain scope that was previously identified really isn't necessary based on new data or whatever, we look for cost savings elsewhere within that project to fund new scope, and that's pretty regular occurrence. Obviously, the budget estimates were, as I said, through a comprehensive process, and some were based on more data than others, but you know, nobody had a perfect crystal ball there, so there's those kind of changes going on fairly regularly.
Okay, thank you. Let's answer one more question, and we've had a couple others, but we'll respond to those through email. When you sell a property, does RACER retain the remaining liability?
RACER retains certain environmental liability related to the, you know, prior to the sale existing subsurface contamination, basically. And we are there to do whatever long-term O&M is necessary, and or if the site's not to closure yet, we would work after the sale to get closure for that property and have to work along with the new owner.
Okay. All right. Well, again, Dave, I want to thank you for participating today. We certainly appreciate your time. And sorry, everyone, we did go a couple minutes over. But this does conclude today's webinar. In the next couple days, you'll receive the recorded version if you missed anything. And again, if you would like to register for the conference, you'll receive $150 off the registration fee by entering the code webinar100. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you.